segurança, como extintores, detectores de fumaça, sprinklers e portas antipânico localizadas à esquerda do palco. Pedimos por gentileza que desliguem os celulares. Também não é permitido fumar e vídeo e fotografar sem autorização da produção. Para mais informações, acesse itaucultural.org.br. Agradecemos a todos. Bom espetáculo.
Bom dia a todos. Obrigada por todos vocês terem escolhido acordar mais cedo e vir para cá começar essa semana inspiradora e inédita que a gente vai ter aqui hoje. Eu sou a Luana Lobo, estou aqui representando a Flow, que é a distribuidora que está trazendo o Longe da Árvore para o Brasil. O Longe da Árvore é o nosso segundo filme esse ano lançado, no nosso selo, que chama Believe Films. E a nossa intenção é reunir narrativas que inspirem nossa coragem de sonhar. E, para conseguir fazer lançamentos como esse, conversas como essa, a gente conta com muitos parceiros que ajudam a gente na democratização do acesso. Então, eu queria agradecer, primeiro de tudo, a esses parceiros. Queria agradecer ao Itaú Cultural, ao Alana, ao Believe Earth, à ONU, Companhia das Letras, a Diageo e a Taba, por estarem com a gente nesse caminho. Muito obrigada a todos vocês. E eu acho que é isso que reúne a gente aqui hoje, né? Essa urgência de trocar em histórias inspiradoras que acolham nossos corações, expandam nossas possibilidades de futuro. O Andrew tem um conceito que ele fala bastante, que eu adoro, que é mais ou menos assim: não aceito modelos subtrativos de amor, apenas aditivos. E, da mesma forma que a gente precisa da diversidade de espécies para o planeta continuar, a gente precisa da diversidade de afetos e da diversidade de família para fortalecer a ecosfera da gentileza. Então, Andrew, muito obrigada por sua generosidade de vir de tão longe, compartilhar tanto amor e gentileza com a gente. Obrigada, John, também por estar aqui hoje com a gente. E, para conduzir essa conversa, eu tenho a alegria de chamar duas mulheres que me inspiram pessoalmente, diariamente, pela coragem de construir diálogos empáticos sobre tudo o que está acontecendo nos nossos dias presentes. Juliana Wallauer e Cris Bartis, Mamilos Podcast, o palco e todo o meu amor para vocês. Bem-vindas.
Mamileiros e mamiletes! Tem mamileiro? Ai, que coisa linda!
Levanta a mão, quem é mamileiro, para eu ver. Tô de olho, hein? Segurando a minha mão aqui, tô emocionada.
Peraí, que eu tô tão emocionada que eu nem tô com roteiro, peraí. Ai, gente, que lindeza, que oportunidade a gente estar aqui, né, Cris?
Vocês viram como é que a gente está arrumadinho segunda de manhã? Ó, cabelinho arrumado. Porque, né, que oportunidade. Muito obrigada pela confiança de colocar a gente aqui para conversar com o Andrew. A gente já assistiu o filme, vai conversar um pouco sobre isso, vai conversar sobre o livro. E
fala um pouquinho do Mamilos para a galera que não é mamileira que está aqui.
Então, né, o que a gente está fazendo aqui? O Mamilos é um podcast que está disponível em todas as plataformas, que se propõe a fazer um jornalismo de peito aberto. A gente costuma falar que a gente é mais preocupada em criar pontes do que em provar pontos. E viemos aqui conversar com o Andrew, porque quem ouve o Mamilos sabe o tanto que a gente é apaixonada por esse livro. Fica lá, que nem Bíblia. Gente, vocês têm um minuto para a palavra. E conversando muito sobre o Longe da Árvore. O que aconteceu quando o documentário foi lançado e, finalmente, aconteceu isso do Andrew vir no Brasil? Um monte de gente marcando a gente. Vocês viram? Vocês viram? Vocês estão sabendo que ele vem? Olha, o Mamilos aprovou esse documentário? E a gente não só ficou sabendo, como foi convidada para estar aqui. E essa conversa vai acontecer aqui hoje, depois vai ser disponibilizada também para as pessoas que não puderam vir terem acesso a esse papo para entender mais sobre
formação de ponte, sobre conversas importantes e sobre identidade. Então, esse convite chegou para a gente vir conversar com o Andrew e é isso que a gente está fazendo aqui hoje.
Então, sem mais delongas, vamos apresentar o homem? Professor de Psicologia Clínica no Columbia University Medical Center, por Longe da Árvore, Pais, Filhos e a Busca de Identidade, recebeu diversos prêmios, incluindo o National Book Critics Circle Award, na categoria Não Ficção. Esse livro foi escolhido como um dos melhores de 2012 da nossa vida, não é mesmo? Pela Boston Globe, São Francisco Chronicle e revista Times e Mamilos, entre outros. Também foi nomeado o livro do ano pela The Economist e pelo Mamilos. Solomon é ativista pelas causas LGBTQIA+, de saúde mental, educação e artes. Fundou o Solomon Research Fellowships em estudos LGBTQIA+, na Yale University. É conselheiro especial na Yale School of Psychiatry sobre saúde mental de lésbicas, gays, bissexuais e transgêneros. E do Conselho de Diretores da National LGBTQ Task Force.
É a mini-bida da Daenerys, né, gente?
Não é, gente? Literalmente, vocês já viram, a gente não tem nem roupa para receber esse homem, não é mesmo? Agora vocês podem aplaudir.
Venham, Andrew!
Entra!
Lindo!
Obrigado, obrigado. Obrigado.
Gente, aplaude mais, tá pouco, levanta e aplaude.
Obrigado. Thank you.
Vamos combinar o jogo, então? A gente vai fazer primeiro as nossas perguntas e depois a gente vai abrir para 3 jornalistas que estão na plateia e depois a gente abre para as perguntas de vocês. Então, vão preparando os corações aí para levantar a mãozinha. Tá bom? Ai, vamos começar, gente. Eu estou vivendo esse momento. Vocês estão filmando, né? Ai, eu estou muito feliz que a minha mãe está aqui e meu irmão está aqui. Eles estão vendo eu viver esse momento. Então, vamos lá. A primeira pergunta... O filme ele é muito bonito, a gente conseguiu assistir ontem, e ele nos leva para acompanhar o dia de algumas crianças longe da árvore e suas famílias, e ele nos permite, através disso, testemunhar momentos íntimos e reveladores. É lindo. Mas o livro, até por ser outra mídia, tem outra construção. E a gente queria, antes de entrar no conteúdo, falar um pouco de forma. Uma das coisas que fascinou muito eu e a Cris, lá no início do Mamilos, foi a forma que você escreve, o seu jeito de escrever. Pela curiosidade no olhar que orienta a pesquisa minuciosa, pela honestidade ao mostrar as diferentes perspectivas em cada polêmica, pela clareza ao apresentar as reflexões no final de cada capítulo com um posicionamento. A gente não vê muito disso por aí. Eu diria que a gente não vê quase nada disso por aí. Em um mundo cada vez mais polarizado, você escreveu um livro para construir pontes. Por que esse formato? Por que assim? E como assim?
Well, I'm a great believer in gray areas and in trying to understand the middle, a great believer in trying to look at the complexities of human interactions and not to reduce them in narrow and simplistic ways. And I feel like we're living in a time in which there is this terrifying extremism coming from both sides. It's a terrible moment politically in the United States. It's, in my view, not such a great moment politically in Brazil. It's not a great moment politically in the world at large. In these complex times, I feel like what we need is a way to bring the people in the middle around to an enlightened point of view. So I have a great sense of the urgency of this in this particular moment. But I also was struck, as I worked on the book, by how much people's understanding at the conditions that I was writing about changed, how much it means to me to have someone who is interpreting into sign language on the stage with me, how much more we accommodate and accept people who are different in some way. I feel like the politics of this time are about pushing people who are different away, suppressing them, damaging them, arguing with them, oppressing them. And it's terribly important for us to change that, not only that we say everyone should have equal rights, but that we demonstrate how much we have in common, how much our humanity unites us, how in many ways the experience of dealing with difference within families is not a rare and unusual thing, but an essential part of all parenting. I said in the book, and I think I said somewhere in the film, that our differences are what unites us, the negotiation of those changes and differences that we have. In looking at those differences and looking at the complexities of identity, I wanted to say, you don't have to make this dichotomous choice. You don't have to go all the way to the right or all the way to the left. You don't have to be in favor of gay rights or completely against there are ways to be in the complex middle. And if we can tolerate residing in that complex middle, maybe we can build a more peaceful society and ultimately one that is more rich and that has higher ideals.
Então, mas como isso não é o mainstream, como isso não é o jeito que a gente está abordando questões complexas, como sociedade, como um todo, como mídia, como partidos políticos, como líderes comunitários, como a gente não está abordando dessa perspectiva, que eu acho que eu e a Cris, a gente concorda bastante com você, forçosamente você encontrou muita resistência, inclusive nas pessoas com quem você foi entrevistar. Que resistências foram elas e como é que você lidou com isso? Pessoas que não queriam que você escrevesse dessa maneira. Não, você não pode dar voz para esses argumentos. Essa voz não pode entrar no livro. Existe um jeito certo de tratar a questão do nanismo. Existe um jeito certo de falar sobre surdo. Não pode falar de outro jeito. Como é que você lidou com isso?
You know, working on the book was a very revelatory experience for me, and I always remember when I started my work, I started by writing an article about the deaf for the New York Times many years ago, and I went out into the deaf world, and I went into deaf households, and I went to deaf clubs, and I went to deaf theater, and I even went to the Miss Deaf America contest. And as I immersed myself in the world of the deaf, I was very surprised, because I had known nothing about it before, to discover what a rich world it was. And I remember the moment of being at a meeting of the National Association of the Deaf with the deaf friends I had made, and we all walked into a gigantic room, and there were all of these conversations flying off the ends of everyone's hands. And I remember thinking, I wish I were deaf. Which is not to say that I wished I couldn't hear, because my hearing is very useful to me and I use it all the time, but that at that moment I was the one who was on the margins and they were the ones who were in the center, and I sensed a great deal of joy in that room and a great deal of connectedness among these people who had this particular thing in common. And I remember being so deeply moved to realize, okay, I have a sense of community with people who are like me in one way or another. These deaf people have a sense of community with the people who are like them, and their sense of community is just as beautiful as my sense of community. And I suddenly felt a great kinship with people who were deaf.
E justamente quando você fala dos surdos, me faz lembrar das situações de muitos pais que são ouvintes quando eles têm um filho surdo. Em alguns momentos, alguns são incentivados a deixar que essas crianças vivam com outras famílias de não ouvintes para que elas se desenvolvam melhor. Então, fala um pouco dessa dificuldade dos pais ouvintes com filhos não ouvintes, como se aquela criança pudesse ter uma atenção melhor convivendo com outras famílias que também não ouvem. Então, começa todo um questionamento sobre família. E você conviveu com muitas delas. E eu queria te perguntar, então, afinal, o que é família e o que não é família?
Well, this is a delicious question. Thank you. I'm writing a book now which is about expanding ideas of family, and which I hope I will get finished in the next few years, and then it will be published here. It's about looking at divorce and step families, at interfaith and interracial families, at single parents, at assisted reproduction, at adoption and foster care, at gay families, at multi-parent families, at paid child care, and at so-called child-free families, people who choose not to have children in the way they live in our society. And in looking at this broad range, I've kept trying to think over and over again, what is family? And I've been very struck that while the nature of family has undergone a profound transformation in the last 50 years, the language we use to talk about family has remained the same, and people are constantly being shoehorned into some sort of ideal of the normative family. And I particularly loved a woman I interviewed, a lesbian woman in London, and I said to her, people say to my husband, who is here today, people say to my husband and me all the time, which of you is really the mom? And she said, when people say that to us, I just say, which chopstick is the fork? Which I thought was fantastic. But I'll tell you the story of someone else. The story of someone else I interviewed. He was a man who is gay and HIV positive. He wanted to have children, but he couldn't afford to do the sperm washing necessary to conceive children himself. So what he did was he got a friend of his to be a sperm donor, he got the niece of another friend of his to be an egg donor, and he had a surrogate. And in that way he produced twins, and all 4 adults are involved in the upbringing of the twins, but he's the primary parent. And I met the twins when they were 8 years old, and I said, okay, you know that these other 3 adults are the ones who were the biological origins of you. I said, but you still call this guy your primary parent. I said, why is that? And his daughter looked up at me, age 8, and she said, because we were his idea. And I thought that was such an exquisite definition of what constitutes family, because we were his idea.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Como é que a gente diferencia o que é um problema a ser resolvido e o que é uma característica? Você cita no livro a dislexia como um problema que você enfrentou junto com a sua mãe e a homossexualidade como uma identidade, como uma característica. Tem cerca de 7 anos que você escreveu o livro e você trouxe muitas reflexões sobre essa linha tênue do que deveria ser celebrado e do que deveria ser curado. Tantos anos depois, nessas caminhadas que você tem feito, nessas conversas que você tem feito, isso ficou mais claro?
So I was very aware of the fact, I am very aware of the fact, that when I was a child, homosexuality was considered in the United States to be a crime, a sin, and an illness. And now gayness is primarily, at least among more advantaged populations in the United States, considered to be an identity, gay identity. And I thought, how on earth did it happen that we got from the point where it was seen as an illness to the point where it was seen as an identity? When I was 3 years old, Time magazine ran an article that said, even in purely non-religious terms, homosexuality is a misuse of the sexual faculty. It is a pathetic little second-rate substitute for reality, a pitiable flight from life. As such, it deserves no glamorization, no rationalization, and above all, no pretense that it is anything but a pernicious sickness. So that was then, and when gay marriage went through, gay marriage was on the cover of Time magazine with an article all about the wonderful experiences of gay people. And I thought, how did we get from there to here? But I also thought, as I began to work, as I said, I started in the deaf world. I thought, okay, I had always thought of deafness as this terrible tragedy. You know, these poor people, they couldn't hear. Couldn't we do anything for them? I hope we make medical progress. And then I found this sense of community. And I discovered that most deaf children are born to hearing parents, that those parents, time out of mind, have tried to get their children to function in the mainstream. It was the same situation I had had. And then a friend of mine had a daughter who was a dwarf. And she began saying, well, do I try to construct some sort of identity for her as a dwarf, or do I tell her she's just like everyone else, but she's shorter? And as she looked at those questions, I thought, here it is again. Here it is again, a family that perceives itself to be normal with a child whom they perceive to be abnormal. And I thought, if we as gay people were able to make this leap from illness to identity, then the only right thing to do is to reach our hand across the divide and say, who else who's now stranded in the world of illness deserves to join us on these shores of identity? And what I discovered was there are many conditions that I would find difficult because they are not my identity. The identity looks daunting and terrible, but that are for other people identities. Now, you asked really, I think, one of the central questions of all parenting, and it's one my husband and I face in bringing up our children all the time, which is that your child has many characteristics and you have a responsibility to change your child. Not changing your children is neglect. You have to give them an education. You have to teach them some moral values. You have to try to teach them some manners. You have to do all of those things. On the other hand, your child also has qualities that are inherent to who your child is, and you have to make your child feel like he or she is the best person in the world and try to build them up in the areas that aren't going to be changed. And some things clearly need to be altered, and some things clearly need to be embraced and celebrated, and many things fall in a gray space in between. And we started the conversation by talking about my interest in that nuance of the gray space in between. And what I want to look at is the fact that every parent, even parents whose children don't have the extreme differences I'm writing about, struggles with what to change and what to celebrate and what it means to change or celebrate particular qualities and particular characteristics. It's one of the great questions of parenting.
Sermos pais é o trabalho mais difícil e mais importante das nossas vidas. A gente não deixa de ser outras coisas. Quando a gente vira pai, a gente continua sendo namorado, funcionário, amigo, filho. Mas os filhos são a prioridade na nossa vida, a coisa mais importante a ser feita, e por isso é o mais difícil também. E a gente precisa fazer uma série de escolhas por eles. Quando eles são pequenos, a gente influencia da religião ou não que eles vão ter, o time que eles vão torcer. Isso aqui no Brasil é coisa séria. E a gente acompanha se eles estão na curva de crescimento ou não. Eu e a Juliana estávamos conversando sobre isso nesse momento. Minha filha acabou de fazer 9 anos e já está com os primeiros sinais de puberdade. E eu me preocupo, nossa, será que ela vai menstruar tão cedo? Será que eu deveria intervir nisso, sim ou não? A Ju tem um filho, um menino, que está dentro da linha de curva de crescimento, ele é baixinho. E aí, ela deveria intervir ou não? O momento, a janela de oportunidade é sempre quando eles são muito pequenos. E tem uma grande responsabilidade quando você precisa tomar essa decisão pela pessoa mais importante da sua vida. Então, depois de conviver com tantas famílias, de explorar os universos de escolhas humanas, a pergunta é: o que você aprendeu sobre o que pode nos guiar enquanto os pais nessas escolhas?
I have a godson who has just told his parents that he is transgender. And his mother is my closest friend. And she and I had a long conversation. And she said, if he's really transgender and the only way for him to be happy is to start living as a girl, she said, I'm fine with that. She said, but I'm not sure whether that's real. She said, I think in some ways he's got a group of friends who are trans. He's in a world that's very kind of pro-trans. She said, I think he might actually, she said, he's definitely gay if he's not trans, but is he trans? I mean, there just are all of these questions. And I said to her, it's sort of telling that when you ask me, I feel like I can give you the names from the research I did on people who are transgender, and give you the names of some psychiatrists who are very supportive of changing, and I can give you the names of some psychiatrists who are very supportive of not making a change too quickly. I mean, neither of them would sort of completely rule out the other possibility, but they tend one way or tend another way. And she said, well, what do you think? Which ones would we want to be going with? And I said, I don't know which ones we want to be going with. We have to talk about it more. It's always so difficult figuring out these fine, gray, shady areas and figuring out which direction you want to go in. And most parents, I think, love their children. I mean, we all hear terrible stories, but in my experience, most parents do love their children and want their children to be happy and want what's best for their children. But many of those parents, even as they love their children, don't accept their children. Acceptance has to be the ultimate goal of love, but it's not the same thing. Acceptance is something that is a lot of work for all families under all circumstances to achieve. And so I think the question of how you get from love to acceptance is another one of these central questions of parenting. And as you described the situation with someone who's short or with someone who has precocious puberty and whether or not to interfere, it takes a lot of research, it takes a lot of thinking. And look, most of us in this room are lucky that if we have a situation that requires a lot of research and thinking, we can do the research. We can stay up late at night logged onto the internet. But many, many people don't have those capacities, and they don't have a way to get information, and they're cut off from all of these technologies. And even if they had them, they may not have the skill to interpret what they read because there's so much misinformation on the internet and so on and so forth. So I think it's a real struggle. I think the attitude with which something is done makes a huge difference. I think if you do it with love, even if you make what ultimately turns out not to be the best decision, the fact that it was done with love will allow your child to say, I know you were doing your best, but actually you were wrong and I have to go this way. Many parents are angry that their children have presented these problems, and they try to make good decisions, but the anger continues to inform them. And in those cases, even if they make the right decision, the legacy of that anger is often resentment and difficulty from the child. So it sounds very banal, and it doesn't sound like a very deep insight, but I think if you address these problems lovingly and think, I am doing what I really believe will make my child happiest, that's really the best answer we can have.
Vamos continuar falando um pouco sobre aceitação, porque você fala no livro o tempo inteiro sobre a dor do pai de perder a expectativa, né? Sobre o luto do filho planejado, do filho sonhado, na descoberta do filho real. E, nesses casos, a gente consegue ver muito bem a diferença, porque existe um salto gigantesco entre o que se esperava e o que recebeu, mas a verdade é que todos nós temos que fazer esse ajuste, todos nós temos esse luto. O nosso filho não é o filho que a gente sonhou, ele é o filho real, ele é o filho que existe, ele é uma pessoa. Como é que a gente acolhe essa dor e consegue enxergar a pessoa que existe, quem é o nosso filho de verdade, não quem a gente esperava, quem a gente quer, para construir uma relação que seja verdadeira e profunda?
The process of having children is always a shocking one. When you decide to have children, you make a commitment to love a stranger. And maybe the person you've committed to love will turn out to have autism or Down syndrome or to be a criminal, these issues that we explored in the film, all of which were also explored in my book. But maybe your child will just, to take what you said before, end up rooting for a different team than you do. And that can be a trauma itself. And so the process of parenting has to do with negotiating the fact that your child isn't what you imagine. And if you allow the imagined child to upstage the real child, it is you who will lose, because the love of a real person can be infinitely gratifying, and the love of an abstract ideal and the frustration at a child who doesn't meet that ideal can be incredibly difficult and incredibly painful. So there's a constant back and forth that goes on between the real and imagined child. And part of the problem, I think, again, is that we see these as two completely separate things. You know, this parent really is still stuck on the ideal, and this parent really knows their child. No. All parents start off with fantasies of what their child will be like. We all have something we've imagined. And all parents end up with children who are different from what has been imagined. And most parents have to incorporate the fact that those two realities exist side by side. There's one mother who I interviewed while I was working on the book of Far From the Tree, and she had two children who were both incredibly severely disabled. They weren't able to walk, they weren't able to talk, they weren't able to feed themselves. They didn't really have any motor control. And she took unbelievably good care of these children through many, many difficulties. She initially kept them at home. She finally realized at some point, because somebody who doesn't have any control over movement is a kind of dead weight, she injured her back trying to lift one of them out of a bathtub, and she realized she would have to put them in a group home with better facilities. And so she put them in a group home, and she went to visit them every single day. And eventually, one of the children was taking a bath, and his caregiver did something she was not supposed to do. And she left the room to go and get a towel, and the harness that he was in was attached with Velcro, and the Velcro gave way, and he slipped underwater, and he drowned. And she was as devastated as any parent who's lost a child. But at the interment of his ashes a year later, she said, "Let me bury here the rage I feel to have been twice robbed, once of the child I wanted, and once of the son I loved." And I think you can have both of those feelings, and that was an extraordinary act of honesty from her, and a beautiful summation of something that all parents, even in much less extreme situations, have to endure. Thank you.
Você tem filhos biológicos e filhos adotivos, assim como eu. Você acredita que a via de nascimento influencia no quanto um filho pode cair perto ou longe da árvore?
I think people often have lower expectations of similarity when they adopt children. And I think that sometimes that sense of dissimilarity can be very dangerous. I was shocked by how large a proportion, something like 20%, of adoptions are negated. The children end up not staying in the family into which they've been adopted. Having said that, I think that we not only take care of our children because we love them, we also love them because we take care of them. The process of taking care of a child is infinitely bonding and presents a great, great intimacy. And I think the children who live with us and whom we see every single day, whose, scraped knees we address when they're young, and whose romantic problems we try to advise on when they get older, and who we're enmeshed with in that way, I think that creates an enormous bond. And I think the bond of proximity, of being close together, is ultimately much greater than the bond merely of biology. The structure of my family is that my husband, John, is the biological father of 2 children with some lesbian friends in Minneapolis. My best friend from college had gotten divorced but wanted to have children, and so she and I decided to have a daughter who now lives with her mother and her stepfather in Texas but visits all the time. And then John and I wanted the experience of bringing up a child full-time in our own household, and so we have George, of whom I am the biological father. John is the adoptive father. We had an egg donor, and then our surrogate was Laura, the lesbian mother of John's 2 biological children. So it's 6 parents of 4 children in 3 states. And we didn't really plan all of this. It's the way things unfolded and the way they happened, and the way that they've happened has been deeply and profoundly moving to me. Oliver and Lucy, the children from that John was the biological father of, for their lesbian mother, are living with their mothers in Minneapolis. I adore them. It's wonderful to see them. Oliver actually came and lived with us for almost a year this year between high school and going to university. We had a great time with him, but there's no question that there is a bond with George, whom we bring up every day, and with Blaine, whom I see often, that is, to me, stronger. But then Oliver and Lucy weren't our full-time adopted children. And John has said often that, in fact, he adores Oliver and Lucy, but even though they're his biological children, it's not the same as the deep, profound, extraordinary bond he has with our son, George. So I think it doesn't matter whether the child is adopted or biological. I think what matters is the engagement you have and the caretaking you do.
A sua exploração sobre família, sobre amor e identidade fala muito sobre o que significa ser humano, sobre que vidas valem a pena ser vividas. E a gente sabe que, como você começou falando, o momento, a conjuntura política mundial fala de um retorno para fascismo, para políticas de apagar certas identidades, apagar certas pessoas, que depende, no primeiro estágio, de você desumanizar, de você dizer isso aqui não é humano. O seu livro vai na contramão disso. O que é ser humano? Que vida que vale a pena ser vivida? Qual é a ponte que nos conecta a todos, por diferentes que sejamos?
Well, the dehumanizing that's going on right now is extremely shocking and I think extremely dangerous. It's happening everywhere. I see it most vividly in the United States right now in prejudice against immigrants, but there's also been a rise in racism and misogyny and sexism and homophobia and all of the ugliest things there are in human nature. I have been working with something called Project Amplify, in which we attempt to get the testimony taken from immigrant children at the US-Mexico border and get people to hear what those children have said. A small group of courageous lawyers went down and interviewed the children and provided exact transcripts. They taped the conversations, they were simply transcribed. A few weeks ago, I was interviewing a woman who is a Holocaust survivor in New York on stage in a museum, reversed roles, as it were. And I did a long interview with her. She's a woman who's now in her 90s, completely on top of things. And she and I discussed in advance that it was okay for me to do this, but I did. Halfway through the interview, I said, and now I want to read you something. And I read an excerpt from one of the things that the children had said. And I finished it, and the audience was all nodding. And I said, that doesn't come from Dr. Butter's experience in Bergen-Belsen. That comes from the American border 3 weeks ago. And there was a complete gasp in the audience of people who were really horrified. I suppose we're living in a time in which there's a lot of upheaval and also in which there's a lot of inequality, and that those are factors that tend to lead to the rise of a kind of gross populism. But I think it's devastating to see that in countries that have been civilized and tolerant, that things are shifting and that things are changing. You know, I grew up with the sort of optimistic sense that the world essentially makes progress and that we gradually get better and we gradually get kinder and we gradually get more accepting and we gradually build a world in which there is room for everybody. The purpose of the film and the book I've done is to make people less frightened of those who are different, to allow people who are encountering those who are different to experience them in a different way. And I get letters from people who say, I saw your film or I read your book, and then I was on the subway and I saw someone with dwarfism and I thought about him really differently than I would have thought about him before, and I interacted with him differently than I would have before. And those are my favorite letters to get, the sense that perhaps in some tiny way there has been a shift and a change. But you ask about this moment, and I feel that while some people are making that powerful shift and change, there are too many others who are shifting and changing in the other direction. And if we allow ourselves to have a society in which there is permission to behave cruelly, in which there are no ramifications to acting with prejudice, in which exclusion becomes a common practice rather than something that we are all fighting against in a united way, then I think that spells the end of the kind of liberal democracy which has built the finer world that we have mostly grown up in.
Falando em humanidade, você começa o livro falando sobre a sua humanidade, contando um pouco da sua dislexia quando você era criança, toda a transição e o empenho da sua família com isso, e depois a dificuldade da família em aceitar a sua homossexualidade. E você fala muito da sua história, da sua dor, da sua chaga, não só nesse livro, como no Demônio do Meio-Dia. Também não é uma narrativa comum mostrar a própria vulnerabilidade. Eu queria entender de você no que você acredita que esse exercício de se mostrar vulnerável faz parte da conversa de um jornalista e também pesquisador para poder contar a história de outras pessoas.
Well, I felt that my qualification for writing this book was my own experience. And I was asking the people I interviewed, more than 300 families, to talk as openly and clearly as they could about their experience. And I thought I had no right to do that if I wasn't willing to share my experience. In addition to that, I'm fortunate enough to live in reasonable comfort. I live in New York, primarily. I'm a writer. I wasn't going to experience a sort of sudden loss of my job or loss of my family because I was open and honest about the experiences I had had. I feel like the dyslexia, I do have dyslexia when I do things like signing books, which is virtually the only time I use my handwriting. I'm always startled to discover that I've spelled people's names backward or I've made other little errors in doing it. But my mother worked with me when I was a child, and she spent afternoon after afternoon sitting with me with a book on our laps and trying to make it fun for me to learn how to read. And bit by bit, I managed. And when we applied for schools, when I was going into first grade, when I was 6 years old, they had me do these various tests, and they said, this child will never learn to read. And my mother said, he already knows how to read. And I was rejected by all 12 of the schools to which we had applied. I was then the next year taken in a school that accepted me only because the headmistress knew my father. He was a friend of her son's. And they took me as a favor, even though I would never learn to read. And I've had a lot of problems in life, and not learning to read is not one of them. I think it's at the stage in some ways for what happened later when I realized I was gay, and I thought my parents will be furious about this, they will be miserable about it. I talk about this in the film. I tried reparative therapy to try to not be gay anymore and to try to learn somehow to be straight so that I wasn't a disappointment to my family. It was a big failure, of course, as those attempts always are. When I came out, I was not thrown out of the house. My parents didn't say they never wanted to see me again. These things happen to many people, but they were upset about it, and they were angry, and my mother in particular was very unaccepting and very intolerant. Before she died, she said all of the right things, and my father later gave my husband and me a beautiful wedding, and we're all very close now, and it's all very happy and very joyful. But it was a struggle, and it was a struggle against the prejudice of a larger society as translated into my family. And the reason that I did both a book and a film that deal in large part with families is because I think you have 3 levels of acceptance. There's self-acceptance, there's family acceptance, and there's acceptance by the larger society. And the family is the one that mediates between the other two. If you've got good self-acceptance, that makes things easier for your family. If it's an accepting society, that makes things easier for your family. But your family is often the thing that says, the group, the set of people who say, we will not see our child the way that you are seeing our child. We will see our child as a complete and whole human being, even if you think that nobody could feel that way about a child in a wheelchair, or a child who was conceived in rape, or a child who is gay, or a child who is in any of the other categories that I studied and examined. And there are many parents who don't get there, but I wanted to write a book about the people who do, because that's the story that I thought might help other families to move in that same direction. And I admire so much the courage of the families I saw. They have inspired me. They have made me a very different parent than I otherwise would be. They struggled. They still had a hard time. They still, in some ways, were ambivalent about the ways that their children were. It's not that it was all just rainbows and unicorns, as people say. But ultimately, they arrived at this profound attachment and connection.
Vamos dar agora a oportunidade das outras pessoas fazerem a pergunta.
Não vamos, não.
Eu vou chamar a Ivone de Oliveira, do Gata de Rodas. Quem leva o microfone? Alguém vai levar o microfone? Eu levo? Ali, ó.
Bom dia, meu nome é Ivone, conhecida como Gata de Rodas pelo blog. Sou bissexual, também sou responsável por ter incluído a pessoa com deficiência na parada do orgulho LGBT aqui de São Paulo. A minha pergunta é: qual é a sua visão em relação à pessoa com deficiência LGBTQI+, na família e na sociedade?
Well, I mean, I think one of the catchphrases of our time is intersectionality. That's the word that means that we all have multiple identities. You have an identity perhaps as a disabled person. You have an identity perhaps as a woman. You have an identity perhaps as someone who's gay. You may have many of these different identities. One of the gross injustices in our society is to insist on dividing those identities. In this context, you're with other people with physical disabilities. In this context, you're with other gay people. In this context, you're thinking feminist thoughts with women. And what we aspire to is to be able to be all of ourselves all the time, to integrate all of the different aspects there are to our character, and not to feel I'm not going to show this side of me here because it might be unwelcome. I'm going to really emphasize this side of me here because it's what we're talking about. Yes, of course, sometimes you're expressing one side of yourself and sometimes you're expressing another, but you have to be able to exist as a fully integrated person. And my aspiration for the LGBTQIA+++ community, it's so cumbersome to say. I'm on the board, as was said earlier, of the National LGBTQ Task Force, and every time I say it, I need a drink of water. But the idea, and it's actually become our motto at the task force, is all of me, all the time. And my aspiration is that people not feel that they can go and be gay on certain beaches and not on others, that people feel like whoever I am, that's who I am everywhere I go.
Vamos ouvir a pergunta da Morria Cachani, é isso?
Bom dia, Andrew. Um prazer imenso receber você aqui na cidade, viu? E estar aqui junto para a gente poder conversar um pouquinho. Eu sou titular de um blog, de um jornal aqui de São Paulo, chamado Inconsciente Coletivo. E é uma espécie de talk show. A gente faz uma entrevista por semana. Chama assim o blog porque é uma ideia de ecoar as vozes que ecoam dentro da gente, consciente ou inconscientemente, a gente querendo ou não, elas estão sempre aí. Então a gente busca ouvir gente de várias correntes de pensamento e tentar achar uma voz de consenso nesse mundo de hoje. Está difícil. Se você me permite, eu tenho duas perguntas para fazer. A primeira é a seguinte: você escreveu um livro, um ótimo livro também, sobre depressão, chamado O Demônio do Meio-Dia. E a minha pergunta é a seguinte: em que medida a questão identitária pode se entrelaçar com a depressão, tanto do ponto de vista dos pais como do ponto de vista dos filhos?
It's important to recognize that all of the conditions that I've written about, including depression and including the many different identities we've been discussing that are in Far From the Tree, the film and the book, that almost all of them contain elements of what I've called inherent disability and elements of what I've called socially constructed disability. So if, for example, you're talking about people with dwarfism, many people with dwarfism require spinal surgery because they have compressed spines. Some people, depending on which dwarfing condition they have other very extreme physical needs. Those are medical disabilities, and nothing that we can do is going to make it into a pleasant experience to have your spine decompressed because your spinal cord is pinching the nerves that run to the rest of your body. It's a medical problem, and it requires a medical solution. But there are also socially constructed problems. The fact that you're a dwarf and that people take photos of you every time you walk down the street and try to make little videos on their phones is a social problem. The fact that people with dwarfism are often not seen as romantic objects except to people who have a fetish for them is a socially constructed problem. And those socially constructed problems require social solutions. Depression, like everything else, is both an illness and an identity. But while I think that for many of the conditions I wrote about in Far From the Tree, the identity can ultimately outweigh the illness, depression, I think the illness ultimately outweighs the identity. I mean, there are plenty of people who don't want to give you a job if they know that you suffer from depression, and that's a social problem. But also the situation itself is inherently painful, and we could have all the social acceptance and all the access to treatment and everything that we wanted to have, and it would not become pleasant to have depression. The very nature of depression, the very definition of it, is a condition in which you feel absolutely terrible, absolutely all of the time. So I would say that this issue of identity and illness, it exists there, but to a much lesser degree. And so The Noonday Demon, my book about depression, was really focused on the way people found meaning in their experience of depression, the way to get through it the best, the way to say that it was meaningful. And I had people who said that they were glad to have gone through it. And what I would say is I'm glad that I went through it because I learned an amazing amount, but I would like not to go through it again.
E agora eu vou chamar o Alexandre Coimba, terapeuta de família. Se alguém quiser, depois no final pode agradecer ele pelas lágrimas do Mamilos sobre irmãos, tá?
Bom, uma honra estar aqui diante de você. O seu livro é o livro mais importante publicado em psicologia no nosso século. Ele transformou a minha vida como pai, a minha vida como psicólogo, terapeuta de famílias. E nós estamos passando por um momento no Brasil que talvez você tenha algum spoiler para dar para a gente nos Estados Unidos. Tem um exemplo icônico que acabou de acontecer. O nosso Conselho Federal de Psicologia, que é o similar à American Psychological Association, acaba de passar por reeleições e tínhamos uma chapa se candidatando absolutamente favorável à cura gay. Ou seja, tentando transformar uma identidade horizontal numa identidade vertical. O que eu ando dizendo por aí é que, se tentarem levantar a identidade, a gente abaixa ela de novo. Mas eu queria saber o que você pode nos contar sobre como esse movimento de tentar retroceder ao olhar mais adoecedor do outro. Como é que a gente conversa com essa nova formação social? Como é que a gente dialoga com essas pessoas que estão escolhendo esse olhar desumanizante? O que você tem visto nos Estados Unidos e pelos lugares onde você anda?
Well, there are two problems with gay conversion therapy. The first problem is that it's very traumatic for the people who go through it. It involves a kind of torture. And the second problem is that it never works. So between the two, we have pretty good reason to stop using it. But, and I feel this over and over again, there are still people, many of them drawing from a base in religion and their perception of religion, who treat being gay as a sort of terrible sin. And I have spent a certain amount of time reading the Bible and trying to look at those religious constructions. And it seems to me that there are hundreds of pages of being told to turn the other cheek and to love thy enemy and to embrace all people. And that there are about 2 verses in which there are brief and rather oblique allusions to the idea that being homosexual or gay is a sin. And so I think the people who are in general championing those therapies are in general people who have got a religious or social reason to do so, and I question their interpretation of religion and their interpretation of society. Now, it's one of the concerns that I looked at a lot in doing Far From the Tree. When do we attempt to cure something, and when do we finally decide that we aren't going to attempt to cure it anymore? But I also said that if my parents had been told when I was a baby that they could have a minor surgical procedure and then I would grow up to be straight, they would have done it. They would have thought it would be an easier life. now I'm in the life that I'm in. I have a loving marriage. I have children. I feel very comfortable, and I have a thing to talk about when I get up in front of all of you. It's ended up being rich and rewarding, but I know that they would have done that. And if we do arrive at an effective treatment that makes gay people straight, I don't think there's any evidence we will, but if it were to happen, I think an enormous number of parents, if it were a treatment in childhood, would select it. And I think the loss to the world in human diversity would be enormous, because I believe that in the same way that we require a diversity of species to keep the planet going, we require a diversity of kinds of love and family in order to sustain the ecosphere of kindness.
Antes da gente abrir para a plateia, eu gostaria de focar um pouco no documentário. Eu acredito que não deva ter sido nada fácil fazer a curadoria de um livro enorme para o que iria para a tela. Todo mundo tem aquele sentimento, né? Todo mundo costuma falar, ai, mas o livro é muito melhor que o filme. Mas o documentário traz para as pessoas uma história muito forte de identidade, que já tem ali, né, envolvido, que é o livro. Então, a gente costuma falar que, assim, olha, isso aqui é uma excelente porta de entrada para as drogas mais pesadas, que é quando você vai sentar ali com o compêndio mesmo que você escreveu. Eu queria te perguntar um pouco sobre o quanto você se envolveu no documentário para fazer a triagem, para poder escolher o que iria para o documentário, e como foi revisitar alguns dos personagens 7 anos depois do livro publicado.
After the book was published, I had, I think, 22 filmmakers who got in touch with me saying they wanted to make a documentary based on the book. And I then had to decide which of them I wanted to work with. And one of the reasons that I chose Rachel Dretson, who made the film, was because I thought she had a very deep understanding of the book. I chose her because I liked her and felt I could work with her. I chose her because I thought she would be competent to get the film made rather than having a lot of ideals and never having it released. There were all of those things. But I also thought she understood very deeply and very correctly that you can't make a book into a film by trying to do a literal translation of it. The book has 300 families in it. The film has 5 families in it. They are different media and they work differently. So I was really taken by that sense of purpose from Rachel. And I felt like she understood the book's most profound and fundamental messages. And I'm very happy with the film. It's a different medium from the book. It plays differently. It is experienced differently. I'm interested in the idea of it being a gateway to the book. I hope so. I like it when the book sells. You know, and as one friend of mine said about the book when it came out, she said, "Your book is so good, I can't put it down, but it's so big, I can't pick it up." So I realize we sometimes need a gateway, but I think the film has artistic integrity as itself, and I think in telling the stories of the people it tells, that it really does convey the basic messages that we've been talking about all morning.
E agora a gente abre para as perguntas do público. Gente, levantem a mão. Ali, ó, na pontinha tem uma pessoa. Eu nem escolhi que é meu irmão, tá, gente? Foi totalmente aleatório. Super justo com vocês. Super justo.
A gente ouve bastante que a história é cíclica e que a gente vê as coisas acontecendo no mundo de maneira cíclica. E eu creio realmente que é dessa forma, só que eu acho que a humanidade, de alguma forma, precisa empurrar essa roda para a roda avançar, porque senão a gente para no mesmo ponto, a gente não está no mesmo ponto, a gente avançou muito como sociedade. Então, assim, a história é cíclica, mas a gente avança. A minha questão é, hoje a gente está num ponto, talvez, indo para baixo da roda, onde a história cíclica está, mais de alguma forma, se pintando para descer essa roda. E eu gostaria muito disso não acontecer. Para você acha que para a gente evitar esses momentos assim mais tensos da nossa história, onde a gente repete os mesmos erros, a gente precisa se focar mais em eu reinventar quem eu sou e buscar uma transformação de quem eu sou, ou na influência do outro ser transformado? em a gente buscar as pessoas que talvez estejam ainda cegos, dentro da luz que existe, estão ainda vivendo numa escuridão de pensamentos ou de condutas e de vidas. A gente precisa buscar mais influenciar ou transformar ou se reinventar constantemente quem eu sou.
I think I understood your question. I may not have gotten all of it. The gay activist Harvey Milk, who was a politician in the United States who was murdered very tragically in the middle of his career. But someone once said to him, "What is the best thing I can do to advance the cause of gay rights?" And the person he was talking to said, and Harvey Milk said, "Go out and tell someone." And I agree with you that we live in a time in which there's a division of people. It's something we've discussed now, a couple of angles up here. And I think that those divisions are very poisonous. But I think it's very hard to hate anyone whose story you know. And I think what we need is to allow the people who seem to be pushing our values, as you put it, under the wheel, to see who we are and to see what we do and to see what our experience is like and what our lives are like, that we need to live out loud. And I talked to so many people when I was working on Far From the Tree who were in tears while we were talking and who clearly found the interviews extremely painful. And I would say to them, "But why are you telling me your story when it's so difficult to do it?" And they said, "I felt very alone in these experiences. And if telling my story to you will help someone else to feel less alone, then I think it's worth doing." And I felt the same thing in telling some aspects of my own story. There are other aspects that were celebratory and joyful. And I think that for all of us, I mean, some people choose to write and make films. Some people only tell the person who lives in the apartment next door. But for all of us, if we live our lives fully and demonstrate who we truly are, then I think we're doing a lot of good in the world.
Eu estou muito emocionada de estar aqui com você. Eu queria começar dizendo que se todo mundo, ou se grande parte das pessoas, pelo menos, lesse o seu livro, eu tenho certeza que esse mundo seria um lugar melhor. Meu nome é Andrea Werner, eu tenho um filho de 11 anos que é autista moderado, não verbal, está aprendendo a se comunicar através de um aplicativo no tablet. E uma questão que a gente tem visto muito aqui no Brasil, no movimento do autismo especificamente, são os autistas que são os que estão puxando a questão do movimento da neurodiversidade aqui, se colocando contra os pais e vice-versa por causa da questão da cura. E eu me lembro no livro que você contou do Jim Sinclair, que é um autista não verbal, e que ele fala que ele se sente ofendido se os pais falam que querem curá-lo, porque isso seria transformar ele em outra pessoa. E, pessoalmente, eu sinto assim com relação ao meu filho. Ele já tem 11 anos, e o autismo é um cérebro diferente. E, no caso dele, eu não consigo imaginar o meu filho sem ser autista. Seria outro filho, não seria o filho que eu tenho. Então, isso, para mim, está muito claro que não faz sentido. Mas quando os autistas que trazem a questão da neurodiversidade aqui trazem esse assunto, os pais de autistas severos se sentem ofendidos e falam que eles não estão vendo o lado dos autistas severos, que não falam, que ainda usam fraldas, que se agridem, que agridem os outros. Então, a briga, em grande parte, está aí. E, no seu livro, você fala uma questão que eu, que acabo trabalhando muito com políticas públicas, vejo de perto, que a grande questão é que, se uma coisa é identidade, por que você vai ter políticas públicas? Por que você precisa de leis? Por que aquela pessoa precisa ser reconhecida como uma pessoa com deficiência que tem direitos legais? E a pergunta que eu tenho para você é se você vê uma saída para esse impasse que a gente está vendo com a questão da neurodiversidade, os que querem cura e essa questão de leis referentes a esse tipo de condição.
Well, we always have laws around all kinds of experiences, especially anyone who is less powerful in the society. I mean, I don't know all of the laws in Brazil, but in many places in the United States, there are laws saying that women should be paid the same amount as men if they're doing the same work, which used not to be the case. There are laws saying that racial minorities should be given certain kinds of support in getting education. There are laws that say that people who are poor and disenfranchised should be able to access services that they otherwise can't access. So it's not just a question of autism and disability, but of a much larger movement of trying to protect the rights, especially of people who can't always communicate effectively for themselves. And some people with autism communicate very well, and some people with autism really struggle with communication. There's an American autistic activist named Jim Sinclair, who's written in the course of his life only about 30 or 40 pages, but he's published a number of essays, and the essays he's published are short but very moving. And in one of them he said, "When parents say, 'I wish my child did not have autism,' what they're really saying is, 'I wish the autistic child I have did not exist, and I had a different, non-autistic child instead.'" Read that again. This is what we hear when you mourn over our existence, and this is what we know when you pray for a cure, that your fondest wish is that someday we will cease to be, and strangers you can love will move in behind our faces. It's a very, very powerful articulation, I think, of the autism rights position, that autistic people should be respected as autistic people, and that they should have the right to a meaningful life around the experience of autism. And I think you're right that you have arrived at this relationship with your son, and that at this point you don't wish him away and you don't wish for someone else. Having said all of that, autism covers a very broad spectrum of experience. And one of the people I interviewed said, I remember, she said, if my child, she listened to the Jim Sinclair quote, and she said, if my child ever arrives at the point at which he's capable of thinking and expressing herself like that, and she says, I was a witch who destroyed her life, I'll know that I succeeded. And so I think there are people with very extreme autism who are very frustrated by the inability to communicate, who experience a great deal of anxiety. I mean, the autistic kid who's in the film at one point has learned to communicate and is an amazing guy. I just had an email a Facebook post I saw of his last night. He's doing all kinds of interesting things. But when we were interviewing him, we said, what is it like not being able to speak? And he said, it's like being a tiger in a cage. That was what he spelled out. So I think we have to be sympathetic to the complexities and difficulties that autistic people face. We also have to recognize that autistic people frequently have minds that work in different and interesting ways and are part of human diversity. And as the sort of big autism advocate Temple Grandin said, she said, when the cavemen were around the campfire, she said, it wasn't the social gabby ones who were going off by themselves and thinking, but if you made the stone pointy and you tied it to a stick, then you could really throw at a distance. She said that kind of mechanistic thinking has always been associated with some degree of autism. And now people do all this retrospective diagnosis and say that Mozart was autistic, which may or may not be true, that Einstein was autistic, which probably is true, and so on and so forth. There's a lot to be said for autistic minds, but autistic lives represent certain challenges, and they need services and they need help, and we don't have those if we don't legally represent them as disabilities.
Oi, meu nome é Rebeca e primeiro eu queria agradecer, Andrew, pelas suas palestras terem sido grandes formadoras de identidade na minha vida. Eu queria perguntar, na verdade, sobre a questão da aceitação. Eu sou lésbica e eu vivo ainda com os meus pais. E isso tem sido uma questão para mim de expectativa em relação a eles me aceitarem. Eu, como filha, eu sempre tive essa expectativa aos meus pais em receber esse tipo de amor que eu não tenho garantia que eu vou receber. Eu queria saber se você tem algum tipo de conselho para essas expectativas que nós, jovens LGBTs, temos dos nossos pais, deles nos aceitarem da forma que a gente gostaria de ser aceito.
You know, I go back to what I already said, which is that acceptance is a process that takes time. And so, you know, your parents may come to acceptance later on. In the meanwhile, if they're not very accepting, I think I might advise you, if you can, to find another apartment and not to live with them. But I think really that it's exposure. I think it matters enormously that there are lesbian characters that they can see on television. I mean, I think a lot of the change in the United States came out of the entertainment industry. I think it's helpful if they know about famous people who are lesbians, and I think it's most helpful if they can actually see people who are leading good lives, if they can meet a lesbian couple who are really happy with each other and understand it. I mean, and I'm surprised always at how difficult it is to get to that point. There's one family who I wrote about in the book, though I don't think I wrote about this episode, but they were completely desperate because their child had just told them that he was gay. We had a mutual friend who put us in touch, the sort of, not a close mutual friend, the daughter of friends of my parents, who put us in touch. And they came to my house and they said, "But is it possible to be happy as a gay person? I just don't see anything but tragedy for him." And I said, "You're in my house." I said, "Can't you tell we have a good life?" And they just had been cut off from it and they had never seen it. And after a lot of conversation with them, they sort of finally said, well, okay, I guess maybe his life will turn out okay. But they had so many blockages in their own primary consciousness. And I thought, how can you live, especially in the suburbs of New York City in this day and age, and still be asking that question? But people are. So I think they need to see you happy. That will be the most important thing. And then to see other models of happiness around you.
Bom dia, meu nome é Alice, eu sou psicóloga, membro trainee da Sociedade Brasileira de Psicologia Analítica e, além disso, eu sou uma surda que ouve. Isso significa que eu uso aparelhos auditivos e, sem esses aparelhos, eu não conseguiria escutar nada aqui, porque eu ouço muito pouco sem os aparelhos e eu não uso linguagem de sinais. Eu estou aqui representando a Paula Pfeiffer, que é uma blogueira que criou um blog chamado Crônicas da Surdez, para dar visibilidade a esse grupo que é extremamente invisível, que são os surdos que ouvem não como o ouvido natural ouve, né? Através da tecnologia dos aparelhos auditivos e do implante coclear. Mas não é uma audição perfeita, tem limites, é mais um instrumento de acessibilidade. Mesmo aqui, não tinha acessibilidade para mim, porque eu não uso linguagem de sinais. As pessoas normalmente acreditam que todos os surdos usam linguagem de sinais, mas, inclusive, muitas pessoas ficam surdas, como o meu caso, ao longo da vida, ou têm surdez progressiva, ou mesmo os idosos, que é uma questão com o aumento da longevidade, mais pessoas vão usar cada vez mais aparelhos auditivos. E a acessibilidade para os surdos que ouvem seriam as legendas, que ainda são muito pouco conhecidas e usadas. Então, aqui eu trouxe um fone grande da minha casa, já imaginando que talvez não teria legendas, que me permite colocar em cima do meu aparelho auditivo e escutar, porque com esse fone eu não escuto e com a língua dos sinais eu também não entendo. Né? E eu tenho duas perguntas para fazer para você. Eu li o livro e vi o filme, então queria saber por que no livro estão inclusos os surdos e no filme não. E a outra pergunta, como você vê essa questão da diversidade dentro das minorias, né? Como eu estou falando aqui, dentro dos próprios surdos, às vezes, quando a gente leva uma bandeira adiante, né, de representatividade de uma minoria, a gente fala por todos, e mesmo dentro dessas minorias existem diversidades. Então, como você vê essa questão?
Well, we did originally think of including the deaf in the film, and we didn't find anyone who was quite right for the film, who worked in the film. And really, when we were doing the film, we knew we could only have a few people. We couldn't have the number of people who were in the book. We couldn't have the number of subjects that were in the book. I mean, we basically dealt with 4 out of the 10 subjects in the book. We also felt that in many ways there had been a number of films that were specifically focused on the cochlear implant, and that people who were interested in documentaries had seen a lot of representations of deaf politics. There was the famous episode of Deaf President Now, when the students at Gallaudet rallied to say that they needed to have a deaf president of the university rather than a hearing one, and appointed I. King Jordan to be the first deaf president of the university. That happened more than 25 years ago, and we just felt like there'd been a lot of exposure of it. But if we had found the right deaf person, we would have gone forward, and I have many deaf friends and feel very connected. I'm interested in your discussion of technology and the role that technology plays for you. One of my closest friends from the deaf chapter, Jackie Roth, came to have dinner with us a few nights ago, and I said, "How are you?" And she said, "I'm losing my hearing." And I thought, okay, but she was deaf, but she's had residual hearing, and she's worked through a mix of lip reading. She also signs because her parents were deaf, but she mostly works through a mix of lip reading and hearing, and she has very powerful hearing aids. She works as a real estate agent selling, houses and apartments in New York, and she said, if I can't use the telephone, I can't keep doing my job. A lot of it happens on the telephone, she said, and I have not realized how much I have a progressive condition. So she was going to go to the audiologist and see what she could do about it. But I think in many ways it's extremely difficult to be between two communities, to feel like you have a disability within the mainstream world and to feel like you're not really disabled enough to be in the signing deaf world. And so you have difficulty and problems in the same way that I think often life is more difficult in some ways for a mixed race child than it is for a child who belongs to a racial minority. So I think, though, that we have to recognize that all of us depend on technology all the time in one way or another, and the stigma associated with technology has to be reduced. And of course, for people who fully lose their hearing, I mean, I have a friend who has Usher syndrome, in which you become progressively both blind and deaf, and she recently got cochlear implants because she had never learned to sign, because when she was growing up she wasn't deaf, and those have been very helpful and very useful to her. So there are many paths that can be traced and followed. Nobody should feel they have to be part of the signing deaf community. Nobody should be pulled away from that community who finds meaning in it.
Gente, mais uma pergunta só, tá bom?
Bom dia, eu sou Rodrigo Santini, sou de Ben & Jerry's, que é uma marca ativista, e a gente sempre pensa dentro da marca em desenvolver diversidade, equidade e inclusão. Acho que a gente sempre fala do tema de diversidade, de aceitação, de inclusão, muito na esfera da pessoa física. Mas a gente tem na sociedade as empresas aí que são parte importante desse processo, o trabalho é parte importante do processo das pessoas. Mas existe uma dificuldade das empresas também em colocarem as pessoas para dentro, em saberem lidar com as situações. Acho que nesse momento a gente já consegue ter clareza, por exemplo, de targets, de contratação, etc., mas criar uma cultura, de fato, de inclusão é outro cenário. né? Então, para mim, a pergunta é a seguinte: como é que, na tua visão, as empresas entram nesse processo, né, da sociedade de inclusão, e como é que se desenvolve uma cultura de fato inclusiva, uma cultura que expanda a consciência das pessoas, porque não é somente aprender a trabalhar com o outro, mas aprender a ver o outro de uma outra forma e voltar para a sua comunidade, voltar para a sua casa e expandir isso também no seu microsistema nessa sociedade.
I spent a lot of time while I was working on this book going into schools where some of the children of the families I was writing about were enrolled. And before I began doing this work, I had always been a great believer in inclusion classrooms because I think separate education is usually not very good education. And I thought this way these children were put in classrooms where they could learn a lot. But I thought it must be kind of difficult for the kids who are not disabled to be slowed down by the demands of accommodating someone with disabilities, especially with intellectual or social disabilities. And so I went in with that attitude. And then I spent a lot of time in those classrooms and came away from them thinking that actually the primary beneficiaries of these programs of school inclusion were not the disabled children, but the non-disabled children who developed a different understanding of disability and who were able to form a connection and attachment and not be afraid in the world and not be prejudiced in the world because they had spent time with these other children. And that, I thought, was a sort of crucial realization. I think often companies imagine that they will hire some people who are disabled or different through tokenism or because they think that it's sort of a nice thing to do, and they start off with this idea that actually it's going to be a nuisance, but it will be a nice thing to do. People with disabilities mostly have so-called splinter skills. They have abilities that are different from the abilities of non-disabled people. It's especially striking with autism, but it exists in any number of areas. And if you find the right jobs for people who are different, they often do them very well. I mean, I talked to someone who had people with Down syndrome who were working for him, and he said, okay, we have these challenges, he said, but on the other hand, they really are tireless. They don't demand the kind of breaks and accommodations that some other people demand. He said, and they're unfailingly, I mean, these were gross generalizations, but he said they are unfailingly cheerful in an office where most people are quite stressed out, and they've made a real difference to the overall stress level in the office. So I think that the goal is to demonstrate in a variety of ways that inclusion is not simply a charity program, but actually a way of building a better school or a better corporation. Thank you. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, Andrew. Você é tudo aquilo que a gente esperava que fosse, porém mais bonito. Né? Uma pessoa que escreveu um livro como esse não poderia ser nada diferente. E a gente está muito feliz de recebê-lo aqui e quer convidar todo mundo para assistir esse filme. O filme está em cartaz em São Paulo, no Rio, em Porto Alegre, mas não largue os seus cupons, porque também está em pré-venda no iTunes e disponível no Videocamp. Parabéns, Videocamp, novamente, pela oportunidade de colocar conteúdo tão importante para o Brasil disponível para as pessoas assistirem. Não é um filme, não é um documentário para assistir sozinho. Chama todo mundo, é para assistir junto, comendo pipoca, chorando junto e discutindo cada pedacinho, porque é sobre essas conversas que nós precisamos ter hoje. Daqui eu tiro, novamente, que a resistência para os tempos cíclicos permanece no amor e na aceitação. Então, essa resistência ela precisa de conhecimento. E eu acho que é isso que o documentário traz para a gente, é isso que o livro traz. Para resistir, a gente precisa conhecer essa resistência pautada na aceitação, torna a gente muito mais forte, porque cria o senso de comunidade, de pertencimento. É isso que a gente precisa hoje, certo? Vamos assistir o trailer passa aqui. Gente, eu estou congelando, hein? Ah, sabia. Está todo mundo congelando, todo mundo com frio. Mas vamos assistir o trailer aí, vamos se abraçar, que aí fica todo mundo quentinho.
This is a call from an offender at a Louisiana Department of Corrections facility.
What, baby?
All parents deal with children who are not what they imagine. My parents really didn't want to have a gay son. I wanted to see how other families managed it. That I don't want to know just about families of gay people. I wanted to look as widely as I could.
A mother can't just stop loving a child.
Personally, I'm very against the idea that someone is researching to find a cure for my type of dwarfism. It's the same message our whole lives. There's something wrong with you and we need to fix it. I don't think I need to be fixed.
In some ways, I wrote in the book to forgive my parents. And in telling these stories, I was investigating the very nature of family itself.
Eu só gostaria de fazer um agradecimento especial também para a Flow. Distribuir filme no Brasil não é muito fácil. Esse tipo de filme, menos ainda. Então, Flow, obrigada. Obrigada por promover isso aqui. É muito importante para a gente. Palmas, palmas de verdade. Obrigada, gente.
Obrigado, obrigado. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And you. Thank you.